Well, hello, everyone. This is Reverend Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, and I am co-convener of the National African American Clergy Network and president of Skinner Leadership Institute. And we are so grateful to be joined in partnership with Sojourners in this TurnOut Sunday Lawyers and Collars Voter Protection webinar for pastors and church-based lawyers. We want to first pause for a moment before jumping in, and for a moment just think about the 210,000 plus Americans who've lost their lives and are suffering under COVID. And as we'll pray in a moment, but we just want to make sure we're keeping our hearts and minds centered on the needs of our American friends and American family. This webinar is set up to equip pastors and church-based lawyers. It's done by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, our partner in this. They've been in this business of election protection for well over 20 years, and they are the experts in this arena. So we're grateful for Keena Jackson and her team of expert lawyers who make sure that we know all of the state laws of voting on a day-by-day basis as they upgrade. We are grateful to you. After this webinar, you'll get a thank you and a quick survey of how you believe that this was helpful to you and other ways that we can be helpful. We would sure appreciate your taking just not even 5 minutes just to fill that out. We want to know how we can better support you and help to bring the skills and the tools that are needed for election protection. And so right now, we know we can't do a thing without the Almighty. We wouldn't even try in something as big as this. So I am grateful today for presiding elder Conrad Pridgeon, Western District A&E Church, Western North Carolina Annual Conference. If he would come now and give us an opening word in prayer just to start this webinar in the right way. Elder Pridgeon.
Thank you so very, very much. And Bishop Davis really wanted to be here on this call today, on this Zoom today. He had an emergency and he had to take care of that. But he wanted me to make sure that I said to Sister Barbara Williams Skinner, thank you for your efforts and your work in pulling this together. Thank you. Let us go to the Lord in prayer. Eternal God, merciful, holy, righteous, loving. Thank you for your many mercies and blessings. Thank you for allowing us to gather in this Zoom today under the leadership of Sister Williams Skinner. We thank you, we praise you, we honor you, we magnify your holy name. We realize, God, that you have all power, so we ask you to have mercy upon those who have been infected by COVID-19. We ask you, God, to grant your healing for those who are sick. We pray for mercy and comfort for the families of those who've already left us, and grant all of those who have not been affected, your protection. And now, God, as we look to this upcoming election, you already know how important it is. You already know what you want to see done. So we ask you, God, to help us to do those things that will lead to a day when justice will flow down like rivers and righteousness like a mighty stream. This we ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you so much, Elder Pridgeon, and we send our love and regards to Bishop Davis as well. And now we are so grateful to have our partners in this work, Reverend Ben Boswell, Senior Minister of Myers Park Baptist Church, and Bishop Claude Alexander, Senior Partner of the Park Church, to bring us a greeting. Bishop Boswell first.
Well, I want to welcome everyone and thank Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, myself, for all of her hard work in gathering us together, and thank others who are joining us, Jim Wallace, as well as my close friend and fellow Charlottean, Bishop Claude Alexander, and so many other esteemed guests, pastors and lawyers who've joined us. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this special election protection webinar hosted by TurnOut Sunday and Lawyers and Callers, and sponsored by so many, the Leadership Institute, Skinner Leadership Institute, National African American Clergy Network, Sojourners, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. I just want to say a quick word about the importance of voting rights and as it pertains to our faith specifically. I know the bishop will also bring words of greeting in a minute. But I think that for me, the fight for voting rights as a justice issue is more important than it has been in many years, certainly in my lifetime. In this time, when the act of voting, the right of voting, is being challenged and suppressed and intimidated and attacked and even undermined, that means that our very democracy is also being attacked and intimidated and undermined, and freedom for all people as a belief, as a core belief, is being undermined, and the common good for all people is being undermined and attacked. And so I think it is, especially at this time, I think about our history in North Carolina, a history of voter suppression and intimidation, voter suppression particularly along racial lines in North Carolina. And I look across to other states at what's happening in places like Texas. So the work that we're doing today on this webinar is of the gravest importance, and I deeply believe in it, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us for it. And I want to leave you with two quotes from the great John Lewis, Senator John Lewis, who said, "My friends, your vote is precious, almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have to create a more perfect union." And also something John Lewis said, "After the murder of George Floyd this year, before his passing, my fellow Americans, this is a special moment in our history. Just as people of all faiths and no faith, all backgrounds, creeds, and colors banded together decades ago to fight for equality and justice in a peaceful, orderly, and nonviolent fashion, we must do so again today." I truly believe that John Lewis was right about that, which is why I've been working with Dr. Skinner and Bishop Alexander on this effort. So thank you again for taking the time to be here for this training and your willingness to be engaged in this extraordinarily important work. I'll turn it over now to Bishop Alexander.
Thanks, Ben, and join my friend Ben Boswell, as well as Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner and Jim Wallace, for all of you giving us the gift of your time on today. The eyes of the nation and indeed the world are focused and will continue to be focused on North Carolina, because the balance of the Senate, as well as the fate of the White House, is impacted by what happens in North Carolina. And there are those who have recognized that and are intent on doing their best to suppress and deny. And as they are intent, we must be even more intent on resisting that effort. And so what we learn today and what we implement from today is of, I would say, epic importance, because we have not known this. We've known this from individuals, but never from a sitting president. And I think that's what distinguishes this time from any other. And so I want to thank you for your being present on today and for the efforts that you will expend in the days to come.
Thank you so much, Bishop Claude Alexander and Reverend Ben Boswell. You've been in this fight with us for a long time, and we know the significance of North Carolina. So we feel even more confident knowing that we can win in North Carolina with the kind of leadership that you provide. And now it's my pleasure to ask Reverend Jim Wallace, the founder and Sojourner, and one who's long been in the social justice movement from a biblical and theological frame of reference. So Jim Wallace will share with us voting as a matter of faith. Jim Wallace, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you, my sister Barbara, all my dear brothers who I know and love and just love to hear your voices. My job, my vocation is to bring faith into politics. Always has been, always will be. So let me do that very briefly because you got a training to do, which is most important today. This is spiritual warfare this time. Spiritual warfare. This isn't wrestling with flesh and blood, just politics, parties, politicians. This is spiritual warfare and evil in high places. There are people planning to steal the North Carolina election. Steal the election by denying and suppressing the image of God in black voters. That's what they're planning. They're planning on throwing away Imago Dei for their own political purposes. This is spiritual warfare. This is so much more than politics. For every black pastor and black parent, I know this is a life and death election. This isn't just who wins and who loses. This is about everything. This is about democracy in the ballot, as has been said. This is about faith on the ballot. When a sitting president in a presidential debate refused to deny and condemn white supremacy, and calls white supremacist groups to stand by and get ready, that means racism is the fundamental religious issue in this election. Other things are important too, but racism is the religious issue in this election. This is about our faith. It's a test of faith. And so when you're in spiritual warfare, you need spiritual weapons, weapons of faith and strength and hope. And we're going to hear how to get your weapons ready. John Lewis is right about this weapon. It's sacred. It's nonviolent. It's the best tool we have. And so we're going to be trained today to ready our weapons for spiritual warfare, because that's what we're in now. This is spiritual warfare for the next 30 days. And I am so blessed to be in it with all of you, because I love North Carolina. I know your state. I've been around all over the place. And North Carolina, my friend Cloud Alexander is right. This may be North Carolina's time. This could be one of the crucial states that turn this election one way or the other. And for you all, I am deeply, deeply grateful just to be among you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jim Wallace. And now we're so grateful to begin the webinar, and we're grateful especially to Ms. Kina Jackson, who's the Senior National Coordinator for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, and Ms. Jennifer Washukwu to give us the details and the marching orders that we need for this nonviolent resistance in our vote. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with all of you this afternoon. My name is Kina Jackson. I'm the Senior National Coordinator for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Thank you, Dr. Skinner, for working with the Lawyers Committee. We really appreciate it. We're really honored to work with all of you, and we are excited to get all of the EP chaplains ready to serve on Election Day. Today, I am joined by my colleague, Jennifer. Jen, if you have a second, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jennifer Wachukwu, and I'm counsel in the Voting Rights Project at the Lawyers Committee. North Carolina is one of the election protection states that I work in specifically. So I'm very excited to kind of give everyone a preview of where the North Carolina election laws are right now, as they are ever changing. And again, just very grateful for everyone's participation today and in the days and weeks to come.
All right, everyone, we're going to get started. One housekeeping matter is if you have any questions, please put those questions in the Q&A or in the chat box, and we will get to them during the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. We've got a lot of things to get through in a small amount of time. So during today's webinar, we're going to go over a few things that are going to help you get through Election Day. One, we'll go over the overall structure of election protection. Who are we? Then I will describe a little bit about your role on Election Day and what you should be ready to expect. Then we'll talk through some of the resources that we'll be providing you on Election Day to make sure that you're able to answer any voter questions. And lastly, we're going to discuss some of North Carolina's election law. So who are we? The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law has been doing this work since the 1960s. We work with a ton of state partners on the ground in 33 states. We're responsible for coordinating over 30 field programs and also recruiting legal volunteers to support our hotline. The 866-OUR-VOTE hotline is a linchpin of our organization, as well as supporting the 8334 turnout hotline for all of you. So on Election Day, we'll be working with partners on the ground on a variety of efforts: voter education, poll worker recruitment, and of course, if litigation is needed, our attorneys are there on standby, ready to take it to court if we need to. So what are the two parts of our program? So on Election Day, all of you will be calling 8334 turnout. And on the ground, as EP chaplains, you guys will be the eyes and the ears. Well, guys and women will be the eyes and ears for our hotline so that we can use that data in order to talk to our partners and resolve voter issues on Election Day. So again, this just shows on Election Day, we want all of you to call 8334 turnout. That's 833-487-6688. And as an EP chaplain, you guys all of you will be reporting to the 8334 turnout so that we can have the information we need to address those issues. A little bit about the Election Day structure. So again, on Election Day, all issues should report to the hotline, from the smallest questions to the biggest questions. So we want you to really use that as a resource. All of the attorneys on the hotline have been trained. They've done multiple shifts before Election Day in order to be prepared to answer all of your questions. We have seen the call volume already exceed our expectations, and by the grace of God, we've seen an enormous turnout from attorneys who want to support this program. So we are really grateful. Our shifts are filled and we are there to support you. So again, we have highly skilled attorneys on the lines waiting to take your calls in a variety of questions, from the simplest questions to the largest. Am I registered to vote? Where am I registered to vote? If I have a disability, can I get access, and can I also get my questions answered if I'm Spanish speaking? All of those questions can be answered calling 866-OUR-VOTE. Then you also have your state leads that will be tapped into our state command center. That's going to allow you to get real-time answers to any of our questions that need further assistance. So if our hotline volunteers cannot find an answer in any of our resources or search or even making a call, those issues are escalated to state command centers. Your state lead and state attorney will be with us in those, and they'll be able to, again, help us resolve those issues as they come in on Election Day. That information will funnel directly to you.
Okay, I'm here. Thank you.
So your role as an EP chaplain. So your field captain is also another resource. If you have any questions, or concerns on election day, call your field captain as well. Those will be the folks that will be giving you your information in regards to what polling locations you're going to be checking in on election day. In North Carolina, I'm sure that there's a roving program, so you'll probably be assigned to more than one polling location throughout the day, and you'll have a checklist. You'll be able to check that and make sure the polls, make sure that there are no issues at those polls. And again, if you have any questions, calling that hotline number. We ask that you arrive 15 minutes on time, 50 minutes early, I'm sorry. Wear a mask and practice social distancing. Bring all the PPE you need on election day to feel comfortable. So if you want a mask, if you want a face visor, bring it all. We want you to be safe and feel comfortable on election day. We ask that you introduce yourself to the poll workers, say hi, get to know them, take a look around the polling location, just be familiar with your surroundings. And also make sure that you're working to guarantee that voters are getting access. So if you see someone and they may have a question, because you're gonna be in your collar, because you're gonna be in your mask, they're probably gonna recognize you and have a few questions. If you feel comfortable taking those questions, feel free to. If you don't, refer them to the hotline. What to bring? Of course, your mask, and again, any PPE that you feel you need. You'll also have access to our top issues and FAQ documents. You can use those to answer simple voter information questions, and we'll go through that in the next section. Any credentials, your ID, if you guys are going to be wearing your collars, if you're going to have an EP mask or any of those things, please bring them. Phone chargers, portable chargers. I'm not sure what the weather is going to look like on election day, but we want all of you to be comfortable, so feel free to bring extra layers of clothing. Bring some snacks, that's important. We don't want anyone to feel dehydrated on election day. Comfortable shoes is a must. You'll probably do some standing. You may talk to a few folks, so we want to make sure you're able to make it throughout the day. Intake forms, extra pens and papers, that's just any extra information that we provide for you during election day. We want to make sure that you bring that to you to the polls to better help you answer voter questions. So your role on election day is to assist voters, of course, and also be EP's eyes and ears. So as you're monitoring these sites, we want you to identify and report any issues that you see on election day. That data is moved through our systems, and eventually it gets to someone who's going to be able to do the extra steps needed to resolve those issues and concerns. So what issues and why would you call 8334 turnout? Broken machines, of course. Broken machines is usually a sign of larger election administration issues. So it could be a lack of provisional ballots. It can be poor training of poll workers at that polling location. So, you know, there are a lot of things that can go wrong on election day, and you have a dedicated hotline to take your questions. Poll workers giving the wrong information, intimidating flyers, and police presence. Multiple voters reporting that they are not on the voter rolls. This can happen. Jen's actually going to discuss a little bit more of the ways and the reasons why that may happen in the next section. High use of provisional ballots, of course, that's a sign that, again, there's some larger election administration issues. There may be a shortage of ballots, and you should call the hotline if you find out that information. So again, we're going to be talking through these things. If polls open late or close late, open early, well, open late, close early. We want to make sure that you guys are reaching out to us on that hotline. That is something we want you to report immediately. Our attorneys will work as hard as they can to make sure that we can get those polling locations or those hours extended. Voters who don't speak English in North Carolina, I believe that they can ask for assistance. So I know that we'll talk through that in the next slide deck. And last but not least, if a polling place is not physically accessible for someone with disabilities, that's really important. In North Carolina, these locations have to be accessible with people with disabilities. So that's something we want to flag, and we want to flag that early. So again, report issues by calling 8334 turnout. That's 833-487-6688. Some basic information we will ask you about a voter: their name, their contact information, what polling location you're at. The race and ethnicity is important because we want to be able to identify trends, of course, and any details needed for follow-up. So they may say, text me, they may say, shoot me an email. It may be an issue that the voter is aware their issue may need to get resolved after Election Day. We just need the best way to reach out to them. And again, call your field captain if you have any issues. Why is reporting data important? In the command center, in real time, this gives us the opportunity to resolve your issues. Again, our state partners in North Carolina are working with us in that state command center. They have relationships with election officials on the ground. So if we have questions, we're able to get answers. And if the sooner we have that information, the better. Again, the trends allow us to identify issues and also use the information that we capture in that data in order to advocate for election changes after election. So a lot of our work happens throughout the year. There are tons of cases and challenges that we're taking to court, things that we're taking to court throughout the year in order to rectify election issues. So again, the data is super important. Notes to remember, again, 8334 turnout, call that number, use it, 8334876688. We are nonpartisan, so we support voters, Republican, Democrat, Green Party. We want to make sure that all of them have access to the ballot. Our goal is to make sure that they have, make sure that they can do exactly that. We ask that you don't share your political views while you're out at polling locations. Because we're a nonpartisan organization, we want to make sure that we're clear with the voters. And of course, there are people on the ground that are there to spy on organizations like ours. So, you know, the idea that someone's not watching you while you're out saying, hey, I'm working with election protection, I'm lawyers and collars. You know, there are definitely opposition forces out there that are working and watching us. They want us to slip up out there. So let's make sure that we're, you know, clear with voters that this is a nonpartisan project that we do during every election year. Again, don't refer to yourself as a lawyer. For all our attorneys out there, you're a trained volunteer. We don't want the voters to feel as if they're your clients. You know, you are here to make sure that they get access to the polls. You're not representing your law firm while you're volunteering. And again, be polite. I don't have to worry about that with all of you. But we do ask that you are pleasant and nice to all of the voters, even if it's clear that they may not want to be that nice to you. We ask that you give them that respect. Tools and resources. So quickly to get through these, we have the North Carolina top issues and FAQ documents that will be with you all on Election Day. You have the state and county website, that is www.ncsbe.gov. Your field captain will be out with you to support you on Election Day, as well as the hotline, 8334 turnout. So the North Carolina State Board of Elections website, this is a screenshot of the front page. You should be able to get some pretty basic information from this website about voters. So you should be able to look up their voter registration. You should be able to insert their first name, their last name, and their registration status in the registration lookup tool. Now, this is a screenshot of our top issue sheet. So as you can see, the poll schedule for early voting, that information is there. What voter ID information is there that's needed for you to vote in North Carolina. Accessibility questions, assistance to the poll questions, actually pretty simple questions. We get into the weeds some in our FAQ document. So you can basically have a general question and look that question up on the FAQ document. So here's a screenshot of that. So as you can see, On the website, these are all hyperlinked. So if you go to 866ourvote.org, you should be able to, from there, get to the North Carolina page so that you're able to see these documents. We're actually in the process of reviewing these, but I think by the end of the week, you'll have all of the most up-to-date North Carolina FAQs. Feel free to go to that website and start looking through this information. Election Day will be so much easier if you kind of have an idea of some of this information beforehand. So feel free to go to that document, click through. We actually make these changes quite periodically. So I know that this information is at the latest current to the primary. So no matter what, this information is quite current. So feel free to take a look at this. Jen, you'll probably talk a little bit about this during the next section. And Jen, we're on the next section, North Carolina election law.
Great. Thank you, Kina. So let's go to the next slide. So in this section, we will go over some common questions about topics such as voter registration, voter ID, absentee ballot issues, broken equipment, assistance for people with disabilities and voters who are limited English proficient, electioneering laws in North Carolina, and challenges to voters' eligibility. So the first topic is on voter registration. And the deadline to register in person in North Carolina is October 31st. That is for the early voting period, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. But if you are going to register either online through the DMV website, which has been accessible to North Carolina voters since the primary in March, or if you're going to use the form that's on the State Board of Elections website that you can download and complete and then send to your county Board of Elections office. That deadline is October 9th, 2020. And if you're going to use the DMV website, you have to have a North Carolina driver's license or DMV issued ID card. And if you don't have a driver's license or DMV issued ID card, then you can use the paper form in order to register to vote. For that October 9th deadline, if you do decide to use the paper registration form and you mail your form to your County Board of Elections office, it either has to be received by October 9th or postmarked on or before October 9th in the event that it does get there after that deadline of October the 9th. And then you cannot email new voter registration forms to the County Board of Elections office. Again, it has to either be mailed or you submit it in person to your County Board of Elections office. And then after the voter completes their registration, they'll receive their voter registration card in the mail, typically within 2 weeks after they complete their registration form and it's properly submitted and received by their County Board of Elections office. And voters don't have to present their registration card. It's just a confirmation that you are indeed registered to vote in the state of North Carolina. But if someone doesn't get their registration card, they should contact the County Board of Elections office. Next slide. So again, with voter registration, it's very important for you all to know that if someone does miss the October 9th deadline to register to vote, people in North Carolina still can register to vote in person at one of the one-stop early voting sites in their county of residence from October 15th through October the 31st. And that's, again, during the early voting period where with same-day registration, you can register to vote and cast your ballot all at the same time. But you cannot register to vote on Election Day in North Carolina. And then there's a link to the Democracy North Carolina website. And you can also go to the North Carolina State Board of Elections website that Keena referred to in the beginning part of the slideshow to find the list of early voting sites in people's respective counties. Next slide. So as Keena mentioned, there are oftentimes where someone will call and mention that they're not on the rolls, or they might be at their polling place and say that they're not on the rolls. And they are trying to figure out what happened and why they're not on the list. So there's a few reasons in particular why someone may not be on the list of registered voters, and these are some of the most common. One is that that person might not be registered to vote. That might be a situation where maybe they did complete their voter registration form, but it was received after the deadline and it wasn't postmarked. And in the event that that happens, then they're technically not registered for that specific election. Perhaps the person has moved and they haven't updated their voter registration, so they may not be registered to vote in the specific jurisdiction, that specific county, and for that polling place that they showed up to that day. Another reason may be if that person has a felony conviction, and perhaps they may not have completed the full terms of their sentence. And in North Carolina, that does include parole or probation, along with any term of incarceration. So there may be someone who is no longer physically incarcerated, but still may be on parole or probation. And if that's the case, then they are not allowed to register to vote and cannot cast their ballot until they've completed their parole or probation. And then the other reason may be voter purges, which is something that has happened in North Carolina before in previous election cycles, and certainly something that's happened in many states across the country. So it's very possible that the voter was registered at one point in time and their name was removed from the list. And so they will need to re-register in order for them to be back on the rolls. So another common question that we get is about voter ID. And in North Carolina, that's a particularly important question, especially in 2020, given some of the court decisions that have come in the last year or so related to voter ID in North Carolina. And some of those questions include, what kind of identification do I need? Does my ID have to, or does my address have to match on the ID with the address that you registered with? And also if you can use your expired ID. Can you move on to the next slide? Okay, thank you. So in terms of the identification that you need, in order for you to register to vote or update your registration using the DMV website, you will have to provide certain pieces of identification. So you'll have to provide your date of birth, your social security number, and your North Carolina driver's license number or your DMV issued ID card number. So those are the pieces that you'll need for online voter registration or updating your registration. If you're going to register to vote or update your voter registration through the paper voter registration form that's on the State Board of Elections website or with the County Board of Elections, you'll either have to provide your driver's license number or your DMV issued ID card number or the last 4 digits of your social security number. So those are the identifying pieces of information that you'll need for your voter registration form. Then, if you go to an early voting location, in order for you to do your same-day registration, there are certain pieces of identification that you'll need, or that a voter will need, in order to register or update their registration that day. And those include your North Carolina driver's license or your ID card from the DMV. And it is okay for you to use an expired ID card. You can also bring a current utility bill, including your electric, cell phone, cable, or water, a bank statement, government check, paycheck, or payroll stub. And those documents are important because it shows your voters, shows your name or the voter's name and address. It could also be a student and their college photo ID card with a document from the school that shows that student's address, particularly if they are a student that is on campus or in the surrounding area of campus, particularly in light of COVID. And then any other document from any government agency that shows the voter's name and current address. So if you have a voter maybe that has any particular kind of benefits program or anything of that sort, and it has the North Carolina Department of Social Services and that person's name and address, that document is sufficient for same-day registration during the early voting period. And then this is probably one of the most important pieces of information that's related to voter ID for 2020, which is if a voter is going to vote in person on election day, right now voters are not required to show ID in North Carolina in order to vote. There's been litigation both in federal and state court on this issue. Right now, the voter ID laws in North Carolina are enjoined. So voters right now do not have to provide voter ID in order to vote in November. However, if this voter is a first-time voter in a federal election, so if this November is the first time that they're voting in a federal election in North Carolina, and they voted by mail, they registered to vote by mail, and they forgot to put their North Carolina driver's license number on their registration form, or maybe they forgot to put the last 4 digits of their social security number on their voter registration form, they will have to provide certain forms of identification in order to verify their identity at the polling place in order to vote. And okay, great. This essentially the same list that we just went over. Those are the same pieces of identifying information that a first-time voter will need to provide in North Carolina in order to be able to vote in the election. So that's really important for first-time voters to know that they're going, if for some reason they forgot to include that information on their voter registration form and they put that voter registration form in the mail, they're going to need to bring some form of identification with them. And this list, their driver's license or ID card, a utility bill, bank statement, government check, paycheck or payroll stub, student photo ID with a school document that shows the student's address, or a document from a government agency. Those are the forms of identification that that first-time voter will need to provide in order to vote in person in November. And again, because voter ID is not required in North Carolina in order to cast your ballot, except for that very limited circumstance that we just talked about with first-time voters, in this instance, it doesn't matter about providing a voter or having an expired ID card in order for you to vote, because you're not going to need voter ID in order for you to cast your ballot in November. So another question that's come up in many other states and certainly has come up in North Carolina with some of the questions that we've gotten so far from the hotline is it related to absentee ballots, and if people have requested their ballot but didn't receive it or have time to return it before Election Day, and can you still vote? And the answer to that question is yes. If you requested your absentee ballot but you haven't received it, you can still vote as long as you have not returned your absentee ballot. And in North Carolina, because of the early voting period, a voter can still vote in person during early voting or on Election Day. There's no need to bring the absentee ballot with you when you go to vote, especially if you haven't actually received your absentee ballot in the mail yet. The key piece is that you cannot have actually voted your absentee ballot because that absentee ballot, if you've already cast it, that is your vote. And that's the vote, that's the ballot that will be counted. So you will not, if you've already cast your absentee ballot, you won't have the opportunity to then go and vote again during the early voting period or on Election Day. North Carolina has a specific website that they're using, Ballot Track's website, where voters can track the status of their absentee ballot. And you can see it through every step of the process, and you actually can register your information on the website. That way you can see, again, from every step of the process. If for some reason there's an issue with the signature or some other issue that needs to be addressed, you'll be able to get that information and have the opportunity to fix those issues with your absentee ballot before or during the canvass period in North Carolina after Election Day. Another issue that comes up is related to the election machines and what happens if the machines are broken. So for all of you, it's very important to find out the approximate time that it will take for the machines to be fixed, because sometimes the machine issues may not take very long to address. And so it might not cause a significant disruption in the voting process for voters. Other times it may take a longer period of time. If the delay is less than 10 minutes, make sure that you let voters know about that. However, if the delay is going to be more than 30 minutes, make sure that you call the hotline 833-4-TURNOUT for further instructions. And also make sure that you flag your state lead. That way they'll make sure that you have all the information that you need to follow up with legal volunteers or local election officials about machine-related issues in that particular polling place. So common questions that come up about assistance. One is for folks who have a disability. Can they get help voting? And as Kina mentioned, polling sites are required to be accessible in North Carolina. There's a website here, demnc.co/lookup, that has pictures for every polling place in North Carolina. That way people will have an idea of what the individual polling places will look like, both inside and outside. Additionally, curbside voting is an option in North Carolina as well. And then that way, voters who do have a disability will be able to vote either in the vehicle itself or in the immediate proximity of the specific polling location. And this is not just on Election Day, but it also includes all of the early voting one-stop sites. And then another question that comes up is for a parent or a child that has a disability or someone who does not speak English, and whether they can get assistance with voting. And that is also required by North Carolina law. And so for individuals who are blind, have a disability, or cannot read English and need assistance voting, you are entitled to have a person of your choice other than the voter's employer or an agent of the employer to assist that voter in casting their ballot. And it's a very limited scope of individuals that can assist that voter. Another question that comes up a lot is about electioneering. And again, because there will be candidates of different parties, it is okay for candidates from different parties to provide materials to people while they're standing in line. However, there is a buffer zone of 50 feet. That kind of activity can take place outside of that 50 feet, but within that 50-foot zone to the door of the polling place, materials, partisan materials cannot be handed to voters while they're standing in line. For questions related to wearing political pins or clothing or hats in the polling place, the answer is yes. And we talked about this a little bit already, but for voters who have a criminal conviction or are in prison, again, if someone has been convicted of a felony, you cannot vote in North Carolina unless your full sentence, including parole and probation, is complete. It's automatically returned to that voter. They just have to make sure that they are registered to vote. So that's something that's critically important, is making sure that folks are registered to vote. And if they're not, making sure that they get registered to vote either before the deadline or during the early voting period using the same day registration so that they can actually vote on election day. And in North Carolina, there's no need to pay any restitution or civil fines in order for someone who's been convicted of a felony to be able to vote on election day. Next slide. And then challenges, and we'll get through this very quickly. But if someone does challenge a voter's eligibility to vote inside the polling place, in the early voting period, challenges to absentee ballots are done separately in writing. And all of these challenges to these absentee ballots are addressed by the County Board of Elections during the canvassing period. On election day, the precinct's election judges will hear those issues on the spot to decide if that voter is eligible to actually cast their ballot. And they'll explain the process to that particular voter to make sure that they understand the requirements, and then make that determination as to whether that challenged ballot will actually count, or whether that person can cast their ballot or not. If a challenge does happen, that's another issue where it's important to contact the hotline, particularly if there's any patterns as to individuals who are being challenged, whose ballots are being challenged. So if you're in a part of North Carolina where you're seeing that a lot of Black voters are being challenged on election day, or any other categories of voters that are being challenged on election day, that's the kind of issue that you would want to report to the hotline to make sure that we are able to have that information and kind of make those game time decisions as to what next steps need to be taken. And then if there is any kind of voter intimidation or harassment that's taking place outside of the polling place, What you should not do is engage with the person that is displaying that kind of behavior. Is again very important to call the hotline, make sure that information is documented in the system, and then wait for the hotline specialist or field captain to instruct you on any next steps. And then we'll move on to the Q&A piece. I think we may have skipped a slide, but I think that's okay, just in the interest of time. So the most important things for you to know: one, the goal is to make sure that every eligible voter can cast their ballot that counts. Another important piece related to that is that our election protection program is nonpartisan. Also, especially with COVID, make sure that you wear your mask and have all the other forms of PPE that you need. Practice social distancing. Vote early if you can, especially considering the early voting period in North Carolina being the about 2-week period that it is. If you have the opportunity to vote early, please do so if you can. Make sure that you show up to your shift about 15 minutes early. There'll also likely be updates and information that you'll get before your shift starts based on things that have happened over the course of the previous shift and throughout the day. So it's important for you to get that information before you get started. Also, this is really key: correct is better than quick. In answering voters' questions, it's very, very important that we make sure to give them correct information. It may take a little bit longer to give them the information that they need, but we want to make sure that we're giving them the right information. And when in doubt, make sure that you call the hotline so that you'll get information to any of the questions that you have along the way.
Thank you, Jen, for the North Carolina election law section. We're going to hop into the Q&A section, and I see that there's a question regarding issues at the polls during early voting. It says, with the president calling for his people to arm as poll watchers, should we be concerned about what happens in the early voting period? And the answer to that question is yes. It's important that, you know, during this early voting period that we're reporting this information and this data to the hotline. So North Carolina Democracy North Carolina is the host of our sister hotline in North Carolina. So during early voting, you have 2 hotlines you can call. You can call 1-888-OUR-VOTE. That's the North Carolina number, and their hotline. Again, they work directly with us, and they're our host hotline for North Carolina. And then we also have our 866-OUR-VOTE hotline. So it's important that we document, record all of these instances, especially as they're happening during early voting, because we can start having conversations with election administrators now about how we address those issues. If we're not getting any calls or any complaints, there's no way for us to track those patterns. So again, I ask that you reach out right now during early voting to 888-OUR-VOTE or 866-OUR-VOTE, and on election day, 8334-TURNOUT. There was another question about election protection T-shirts. I think Dr. Skinner has a plan for what the EP chaplains will be wearing on election day.
We have a mask with TurnOut Sunday loyas and collars for our pastors, who we call our EP chaplains and our church-based lawyers. That's what we have, and we'll make those available through our state leads.
Okay, awesome. We may have another chat question. We have 2 questions. Miss Cassandra Sparrow, do you want to unmute yourself? Oh, wait.
I think the question was about the availability of the recording and the presentation. I saw 2 questions, and the answer to that is yes and yes.
Okay. And in the Q&A, someone wanted me to repeat 833-487-6688 is the 8334 turnout line for the EP chaplain. So that is 833-487-6688.
That's election day only.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to repeat the early voting number again?
Oh, sure, no problem. That's 1-888-OUR-VOTE or 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And I'll put that in the chat too.
Okay. Can we just make sure that the pastors know from this incredible presentation, thank you so much, Jennifer Washukwu, that the pastors should be preparing their church before the election by making sure everyone is registered to vote. They can go on vote.org to make sure, because they may have been purged. We don't know. We want to make sure, even though they voted in the last election, we want to make sure that they know their polling location. Same thing. They need to make sure that whatever ID they need, for whatever their circumstances, they have that. And then finally, pastors might host a Facebook Live or a Zoom call to review the issues on the ballot, not just the top of the ballot, but every element on the ballot as well. Are there any questions? Is that the extent of the questions that we have?
I think so. There isn't anything left in the Q&A section.
Okay, so we want to just, first of all, before we close in prayer, we want to thank our presenters. We are really grateful to the presiding elder of the AME Church, Conrad Pridgeon, for giving us that opening prayer, wonderful opening prayer on behalf of Bishop James Davis. We are grateful to Reverend Ben Boswell, Bishop Claude Alexander for their amazing support for TurnOut Sunday Lawyers and Callers from the very beginning. Thank you, Jim Wallace, for making it so clear that our faith is rooted in all that we know about the care for the least of these, Matthew 25, and voting is a part of that. We are very grateful that last week we received notice from the Progressive National Baptist Church, which is the convention that Dr. King was part of, that the Progressive National Baptist Convention will be supporting TurnOut Sunday, Lawyers and Callers. And I'm going to ask Bishop, Dr. Gil Wright, who is the Southern Region leader for the Progressive National Baptist, just to greet us closing, and then we'll close with prayer with Dr. Walker. Bishop, Doctor, I'm making you a bishop. Dr. Wright first, and then Dr. Dwayne Walker. Dr. Wright, are you on?
Yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I thank you for what you're doing, Dr. Skinner, and to all the lawyers and all those that was on the Zoom call, because this election here is important, and we all have to be prayerful about it, and we all have to let the Lord lead us in the right direction, and I know he's leading you in the right direction, and we'll keep you in prayers also, and thank you so much.
Absolutely, and we're grateful especially for our amazing Lawyers and Callers partner, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, Ms. Keena Jackson and Ms. Jennifer Wachukwu, for your wonderful presentation. And with that, we'll ask Dr. Dwayne Walker, pastor of Little Rock AME Zion Church, if he would bring us a closing prayer.
Thank you so much, Dr. William Skinner, and to all of you who are on this call on today. Thank you for this incredible information that we've all received, and so grateful that we will receive a copy of it as well, because it is a major. We're going to do our part to protect the election any way we can. And thank you for the encouragement as well as the information. Let us pray. God of grace and God of glory, on thy people pour thy power. Crown that ancient church's story, bring her bud to glorious flower. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the facing of this hour, for the facing of this hour. We thank you, O God, for this day and every day, and for the opportunity you provided us to receive this information as we prepare for perhaps the greatest election of our lifetime. We know, God, that we're up against so much, but you promise in your word that no weapon formed against us will prosper. We're mindful that weapons will be formed. We're grateful that they will not prosper. Now, God, help us to take this information that we received and distribute to our congregations, to our families, and that you will strengthen us as we prepare to go to the polling sites. And we will represent you by being a light in dark places, by being hope for those in despair, by being love for those who even show hate. Thank you for the leadership of this webinar and for those who have given their wisdom and their knowledge to us on today. Dismiss us from this session, but never from your presence. We ask it in the name of your Son and our Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a blessed rest of the day. Thank you so much for being here.
Amen.